Most of us, when we picture a map of the world, see a very particular image. It is the one that hung in our school classrooms. This familiar map is usually the Mercator projection. But here is a startling fact. This map has been telling us a rather big fib, a geographical untruth for centuries. It shows Greenland looking almost as large as the entire continent of Africa. In reality, Africa is about 14 times bigger than Greenland. The Mercator map stretches land masses, especially as you move further away from the equator towards the poles. This visual exaggeration has consequences, subtly shaping our perception of global importance. It is high time we started questioning this familiar image. The man behind this famous map was Gerardus Mercator. He was a Flemish cartographer, a mapmaker of great skill, living in the 16th century. When he unveiled his world map in 1569, he was not trying to fool anyone about the size of continents. His primary concern was navigation. Mercator's genius was to design a map where lines of constant compass bearing, known as rum lines or loxodromes, are represented as straight lines. This was a game changer for mariners. The Mercator projection preserved the shapes of coastlines locally, which was also helpful for recognizing landmarks when approaching land. So for its intended audience, the seafarers of the world, the Mercator projection was not a lie, but a wonderfully practical tool. However, this very feature that made it so useful for navigation, the straight rum lines, is what causes the dramatic distortion of areas, especially at high latitudes. The tool was perfect for the journey, but not for understanding the true scale of the destinations themselves, or the lands in between. The Mercator projection, for all of its navigational utility, is not the only way to peel our global orange and lay it flat. Many other map projections exist, each with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. One of the most well-known alternatives, particularly when discussing area accuracy, is the Gaulle-Peters projection. This projection attempts to show all land masses with their correct relative areas. When you look at a Gaulle-Peters map, Africa rightfully appears vast, and Greenland shrinks to its more modest true proportions. The Gaulle-Peters projection, promoted by Arno Peters in the late 20th century, aimed to provide a more fair representation of the world. However, the Gaulle-Peters projection is not without its own critics or distortions. While it preserves area, it significantly distorts the shapes of continents. Ultimately, the existence of projections like Gaulle-Peters teaches us a valuable lesson. There is no single, correct flat map of the world. Maps were not just passive records of geographical features during the age of colonialism, they were active instruments of power and control. European colonial powers relied heavily on cartography. The act of mapping a territory was often one of the first steps in claiming it. By drawing lines on paper, imperial administrators could define borders, allocate land, and assert sovereignty over vast regions. These maps became legal documents, legitimizing colonial possession in the eyes of other European powers. The process of colonial mapmaking often involved erasing local knowledge and imposing a European worldview. This cartographic violence had long-lasting effects, contributing to the marginalization and dispossession of indigenous communities across the globe. Maps guided the construction of railways and roads not necessarily for the benefit of the local population, but to facilitate the extraction of wealth. Take another look at that familiar world map, the Mercator, or a similar one. Where is Europe typically placed? Almost invariably, it is positioned at or very near the center. The prime meridian, the line of 0 degrees longitude, passes through Greenwich in London, effectively making Britain the starting point for measuring east and west. This is no accident of geography, it is a deliberate choice that reflects historical power dynamics. Placing Europe at the center of the world map became standard practice during the height of European colonialism and global influence. This Eurocentric cartographic convention has profound psychological implications. When one region is consistently placed in the middle, it subtly suggests that it is the most important, the default part of the world. Other regions become peripheral, defined by their relationship to this center. But what if we were to center the map differently? Imagine a world map with the Pacific Ocean at its heart. Suddenly Asia and the Americas appear as neighbors across a vast expanse, and Europe is pushed to the western edge. These alternative perspectives are perfectly valid cartographically. They simply choose a different center for their projection. Recognizing this is a crucial step towards a more global and less biased understanding of our world. It is tempting to think of maps as objective scientific documents, like photographs of the Earth, but this is far from the truth. Every map is a creation, a product of choices made by the cartographer. These choices are not always conscious biases. Sometimes they are driven by the map's purpose, the available data, or cartographic conventions. Consider, for example, the simple act of naming. The names given to places on a map can reflect political power or cultural dominance. A mountain might have one name used by indigenous people for centuries and another given to it by colonial explorers. Which name appears on the map often depends on who is making the map and for whom. The power of a map lies in its ability to present complex information in a visually accessible format. Understanding that cartography is an art and a science, one that involves selection and interpretation, is crucial. The Cold War, that long period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies, was not just fought with spies and an arms race. It was also fought with maps. Cartography became a powerful tool of propaganda, used by both sides to shape public opinion, justify policies, and demonize the opponent. These maps were not subtle. They were designed to evoke strong emotions, primarily fear and suspicion. They painted the world in stark, confrontational terms, leaving little room for nuance or understanding of the other side's perspective. One common tactic was the use of color and symbolism to represent ideological divides. Soviet-aligned countries were often depicted in menacing shades of red, visually reinforcing the Red Scare prevalent in the West. Maps would show the spread of communism like a creeping stain across the globe. The impact of these Cold War maps on public consciousness was significant. They presented a simplified us versus them narrative. Even though the Cold War has ended and colonialism has formally receded, the legacy of biased and distorted maps continues to shape our understanding of the world in subtle yet powerful ways. The Mercator projection, for instance, still hangs in many classrooms and appears frequently in online mapping tools. This means that new generations are still absorbing its inherent distortions. This ingrained Mercator mindset can influence how we perceive the importance of different regions in global affairs. When Africa looks smaller than Greenland on a map, it can be harder to grasp the sheer scale of the continent. This visual misrepresentation can contribute to a skewed understanding of development issues, population densities, and the relative contributions of different nations to the global economy or culture. Furthermore, the political biases embedded in older maps can sometimes resurface in contemporary disputes. Borders drawn by colonial powers, often with little regard for ethnic or tribal realities on the ground, continue to be sources of conflict in many parts of the world. The way these borders are depicted on maps can become highly contentious. These cartographic disputes are reminders that maps are not just about geography, they are deeply intertwined with politics and history. So what is the takeaway from this journey through the world of map deceptions? It is not to lose faith in maps entirely. Maps are incredible tools, essential for navigation, planning, understanding our environment, and so much more. The key, however, is to approach them with a healthy dose of curiosity and critical awareness. One practical step is to actively seek out and explore different map projections. Do not just settle for the familiar Mercator. Look at a Gaulle-Peters projection to appreciate relative land areas. Explore the Winkle triple, which offers a good balance of distortions. Beyond projections, pay attention to the silences on a map. What is not being shown? Are there disputed borders that are represented as fixed lines, thus favoring one side's claim? Asking these questions transforms map reading from a passive activity into an active investigation, a kind of geographical detective work.